Hi, this is Lisa Rawls, the naturalist for the Winnebago County Conservation Board. Each year we try to offer some wildflower walks to help people learn more about the amazing diversity of flowering plants that we have here in North Iowa. Those walks generally, though, require people to gather together onto individual flowers, observing their features and their characteristics. This year, though, unfortunately, gathering together is not really a very safe thing to do. So we've decided to offer this virtual walk, showcasing some of the more common summer wildflowers that bloom here in North Iowa during the middle of the summer. These, of course, are not all of our summer wildflowers. In fact, some of our summer flowers are already done blooming, while others have yet to bloom. But hopefully this gives you a little insight into the beauty, variety, and uniqueness of at least some of the flowers that bloom here in North Iowa during the summer months. Although there are a lot of different flowers blooming right now, most of them have one thing in common. They are very important pollinator plants. Countless pollinators such as butterflies, bees, moths, hummingbirds visit most of these flowers throughout the summer, drinking nectar, collecting pollen, pollinating the flowers themselves. Without many of these flowers, we wouldn't have the diversity of pollinators that we have, and pollinators are essential to a healthy environment. So in turn, these flowers are also essential to a healthy environment. While most of our spring wildflowers bloom in our woodlands early in the year before the trees leaf out, most of our summer wildflowers bloom in open areas, such as fields, pastures, prairies, and roadsides, so they're usually very easy to find. The first walk we're going to enjoy is just a quiet walk for a few minutes to observe the beauty that is our summer wildflowers. After that, we'll take a look at some specific flowers. So come on along. I hope you enjoyed that. Now walk with me again as we take a closer look at some of these summer wildflowers. Here along the shore of Lake Catherine, we have a swamp milkweed. Swamp milkweeds are very similar to the other milkweeds, but of course they grow where the soil tends to be a little wetter, along streams and rivers, creeks, ponds, lakes, places like that. The flowers are a bright purple color, but otherwise look very similar to the butterfly milkweed with their bright orange flowers. And of course, like all the other milkweeds, they are important to monarch butterflies because monarch butterflies only lay their eggs on milkweed plants. And of course, swamp milkweed is one of those milkweed plants that is very important to the monarch butterflies. Probably the tallest flower you're going to see in Iowa this time of year is the compass plant. It typically tends to grow much taller than the other flowers, as you can see here. The plant gets its name from these large leaves, flat leaves, that many years ago pioneers, at least some pioneers, believed actually pointed north and south. And they would use these leaves as kind of like a compass to help them navigate as they crossed the prairie. We now know that these leaves do not always point north and south. In fact, they actually tend to move with the sun. So hopefully the pioneers didn't use these leaves too much, otherwise they probably would have gotten hopelessly lost. Now, a lot of these different plants had different kinds of uses over the years. In the case of the compass plant, the top of the compass plant inside the stem has a kind of a gummy substance, and pioneer kids and Native American kids as well used to use that gummy substance as a kind of chewing gum. So just one of the many uses of some of these different flowers. Perhaps one of the strangest looking plants you're going to see in Iowa this time of year is a rattlesnake master. Rattlesnake master flowers look odd because it looks like they don't have any petals at all. But in reality, they do have petals. The petals are just very, very small. And in fact, they are so small that the reproductive parts of the flowers, the anthers, actually extend above the petals, giving the flowers kind of a pincushiony or prickly appearance. Another thing that makes this flower kind of odd are the leaves. The leaves are very large and thick, much like yucca plants or aloe plants, and that's just an adaptation they have for drought conditions. So they can hold moisture much like yucca or aloe leaves can, and so they can survive drought conditions very well. A lot of people are curious about the name rattlesnake master, where that name comes from. And as far as we can tell, the name dates back to about the 1700s, when people believed that the sap in the plant could actually be used as a preventative for snake bites. They could actually prevent snake bites. The roots and the leaves were also used for some other things, but as far as we can tell, there are really no medicinal purposes at all for this plant. The leaves, though, were used by many Native American tribes to weave things like baskets and sandals and things like that. So it did have some uses, just no medicinal uses that we know of. Here we have some yellow cone flowers, or sometimes they're called gray-headed cone flowers. You can see how they get their name. They have a very unique shape. They kind of look like upside-down cones. They bloom for a very long time, so we do tend to see them throughout the late summer months. And when they do go to seed, their seed heads shed their seeds from the top down. So like you can see right here, there's a few flowers have already started to lose their seeds, and they start at the top and shed their seeds as they go down. These flowers are very hardy. They are very common because they are so hardy, and they can be found throughout Iowa, and a lot of times in disturbed areas, but also in very high quality prairies as well. One kind of unique thing about the cone flowers is that their seed heads, if you take their seed heads and kind of crush the seed heads or just take a whiff of the seed heads, they actually have a smell of licorice, which makes them kind of unique. Probably some of the most beautiful of our summer wildflowers are the purple cone flowers. And of course, they get their name from their cone shaped flower, which makes them very easy to identify. They are actually members of the daisy family, although they don't look much like daisies. They're actually members of the daisy family. They're also easy to identify by this very, very kind of sharp and prickly center that they have. Long after the petals have died and fallen off, those seed heads, those very sharp seed heads, are left behind, and that makes the flower easy to identify even after the petals have fallen off. Of course, over the years, purple coneflowers have been used for a variety of medicinal purposes, but today mainly we know them as a really, really good flower for pollinators. They attract a lot of bees and a lot of butterflies, and that's primarily what they're used for today. Probably one of the more distinctive flowers we see this time of year is the Culver's root. It's distinctive because the flowers have kind of a spiked shape to them, which is kind of unusual, but also because they kind of taper at the top, so that gives them a very easily identifiable appearance. The roots were used by the Native Americans and pioneers for a variety of medicinal purposes, but we don't know how effective those medicinal purposes really were. And we believe that the name Culver probably came from an early pioneer physician that became known for actually using the root for those medicinal purposes. Probably one of the more common wildflowers we see here in Iowa in the summer months are the black-eyed Susans. It's easy to see where they get their name. They kind of look like they have black or brown eyes. They are very, very hardy, and so as a result of that, they are very, very common throughout the state of Iowa. And we tend to see them in disturbed areas, but we also tend to see them a lot in high-quality prairies as well. So they are very common. You will see these throughout the summer months here in Iowa. Butterfly milkweed plants look very similar to swamp milkweed plants. There's a couple main differences though, of course. Their flowers are a bright orange color instead of a purple color, and they tend to grow in a much drier kind of area, much drier soil than the swamp milkweed flowers do. Of course, like with the other milkweeds, they are preferred by monarch butterflies. Monarch butterflies will only lay their eggs on milkweed plants, and butterfly milkweeds are, of course, a milkweed plant, and so they are very, very important to monarch butterflies. Perhaps some of the most attractive of our summer wildflowers are blazing stars. They bloom in a bright purple color, and they have this spiked shape to them, which makes them very easy to identify. They actually bloom from the top down. So when you see these flowers blooming, if you see them blooming at the top, then you know that they have just begun to bloom. And if you see them blooming more towards the bottom, then they are just finishing up with their blooms. They tend to grow in moister areas, so you'll find them in low-lying areas such as road ditches and places like that. And not only they are attractive to look at, they are also extremely attractive to pollinators. They have a very sweet nectar, which makes them attract a lot of pollinators like bees and butterflies and even hummingbirds. Here in Iowa, we basically have 3 species of milkweed, and this is the most common kind of milkweed we have here in Iowa, the common milkweed. It is pretty much done blooming now for the year, but you can still see these common milkweed plants all over in road ditches, in disturbed areas, in fields, and of course, you can identify them by, right now, at least, by those very distinctive seed pods that they've produced. Of course, milkweeds are the only plant that monarch butterflies will lay their eggs on. And so even though the common milkweed is not necessarily probably the most beautiful of our summer wildflowers, it probably is one of the most important. So this is a common milkweed. These tall flowers that are just beginning to bloom are called cup flowers or cup plants. Sometimes people call them rosin weed. And what makes them unique is that they are taller than most of the other flowers that we see this time of year. And they're easy to identify by their leaves. They get their name because their leaves actually attach very, very closely to the stems and form kind of a cup along the stem. And that's where they get the name cup flower or cup plant. As they mature, it's going to be kind of hard to see this, but as they mature, their stems actually turn kind of a reddish color and kind of become angular. They kind of form a square shape to them. So that again makes them unique. They also tend to attract aphids, which you may think is not necessarily a good thing, but if you're a bird that likes to eat insects, those aphids, sometimes it's a little grocery store for a lot of birds. And so a lot of times late in the summer, you'll see birds coming to these flowers to pick off the aphids that are attracted to these cup plants. Here we have a field of Queen Anne's lace. Queen Anne's lace is actually not a native flower to North America. So by many people, it's considered kind of a weedy, invasive kind of flower. And it does tend to grow where it's dry and disturbed. Um, so for that reason, again, a lot of people do consider it kind of a weedy flower. But it really has some beautiful flower heads. These flower heads are kind of shaped like umbrellas. The middle of the flower head has lots and lots of little flowers blooming on it. These are actually members of the carrot family. So there are parts of these flowers that actually do smell like carrots. The leaves kind of resemble the leaves of a carrot plant. So you do have some indications then that yes, it is related to the carrot. As the legend goes, Queen Anne was actually challenged at one time to create a lace as beautiful as these flowers. And as she was knitting that lace, she accidentally pricked her finger, and a drop of blood fell on the lace. And if you look at these flowers, you will see most of them have in the middle of this flower head one or two or sometimes three little tiny flowers that are actually kind of a purplish red color. And that is supposed to be Queen Anne's blood, the blood that she dripped when she pricked her finger, creating that lace. And so that's kind of how the legend goes. Now, when these are done blooming, they actually fold up, and their seed heads kind of resemble little bird nests. So when you get towards the end of the growing season, you'll see whole fields of just these little bird nest-like seed heads all over the field. One of the more common summer wildflowers we see here in Iowa is wild bergamot. It's also known as bee balm because it attracts a lot of pollinators. You'll see a lot of bees, butterflies, even hummingbirds that will use these flowers. They have kind of a unique appearance because, sort of like the rattlesnake master, their anthers extend above the flower itself, kind of giving the flower kind of a pin-cushiony look. But their petals are much larger, and so they don't have quite the same appearance as a rattlesnake master. They don't look quite as prickly as a rattlesnake master does. They are actually a member of the mint family. They have, it's kind of hard to tell here, but they actually have square stems. And if you take those stems and kind of roll them in your fingers, you'll notice that they are square, and that's a very distinctive characteristic of the mint family. If you want to make sure they're a member of the mint family, all you have to do is just tear off a little piece of a leaf, crush it in your hands, take a smell of it, and you'll definitely smell an odor of mint. Here we have some ox eyes. Sometimes these are called false sunflowers. Now, we do have a lot of yellow flowers that bloom here in North Iowa in the summertime. And it might be kind of hard to tell one yellow flower from another, but they all have some distinguishing characteristics that set them apart from other yellow flowers. In the case of these ox eyes, one of the things that sets them apart is that they have yellow middles, so the centers of the flowers kind of match the petals. They also have these large arrowhead-shaped leaves that are kind of sharply toothed along the edges, and that's also another good distinguishing characteristic. These flowers are very long blooming. They tend to bloom for quite a while through the late summer months, and they tend to grow in areas that are mostly dry, but they are very common here in northern Iowa. Here we have some vervain flowers. Vervain is sometimes considered a weedy flower because it tends to grow in disturbed areas where there are a lot of weeds, and so sometimes it's also considered a weed. But the flowers are actually very pretty. They grow in these spike kind of shapes right here. They tend to bloom from the bottom up. So these flowers right here are just about done blooming. Now, of course, once they're done blooming, they have formed seeds, and back many years ago, the Native Americans would use those seeds. They would take those seeds and they would either roast them and eat them that way, or they'd grind them up and make a flour out of them. So even though these plants are considered by some people as a weed today, back during the days of the Native Americans, they were actually a very useful kind of plant. Here we have some sweet clover. Today, this tends to get overlooked a lot, but historically, it has been used as a forage crop. It's very hardy, and so has been used as a forage crop. Also, believe it or not, it has been used as a fertilizer, and that's because being a clover, it is a legume. It is a nitrogen-fixing plant, and so back before World War II, it was actually used as a fertilizer. Of course, after World War II, we had commercially produced fertilizers that we've used ever since, but before World War II, this was actually a very important source of fertilizer. I hope you've enjoyed observing these wildflowers with me today. Of course, the video is in no way a substitute for actually seeing these flowers firsthand, but it's probably the next best thing. There are a few wildflowers that are just now beginning to bloom, so watch our Facebook page and our Twitter feed, and we'll post another shorter video later that will highlight these late bloomers. Since the best way to observe wildflowers is to actually get out and see them up close, we hope that you'll do just that using the information we presented here today. Iowa's got a wonderful variety of colorful summer wildflowers. Be sure to enjoy them before the cooler days of fall set in. Thanks again for being with me today. Have a good day.